In this video, we're going to begin setting up the logic for our 2D physics-based character controller for our player here. To get started, let's go ahead and create a new folder to host all of our scripts. From here, let's right-click our scripts folder, create, and let's create a new C# script called player. Once that's compiled, select your player game object and drag the player script to the object. Now our player game object has a player script component. Once you've done that, double-click the script to open it in Visual Studios. When Visual Studios has finally opened, we are ready to begin. So for this game, we're going to create the functionality for both mobile as well as PC. To begin, we're going to be focusing on just the PC portion. We're going to get to the mobile UI as well as all of the functionality for that later in the course. Right now, we're going to be working on the system of using the WSAD or the arrow keys to move. Now, if you're familiar with my first course, The Ultimate Guide to Game Development with Unity, we covered the input manager and how to get access from the left and right horizontal inputs. So what I would like us to do here is we need to do just that. We need to get access to those inputs so that we can control our player left and right. And then what we need to do now is instead of using transform.translate to move our object, we're actually going to be using the rigid body 2D system, and we're going to be modifying the velocity of our player. So how do we get started doing this? Well, we know that we're going to be using velocity, which is going to be using the physics system of Unity. So if you select our player here, let's add a component and let's add a rigid body 2D. In order to do anything on this, we have to first include this rigid body 2D component into our script. So we need to get access to this rigid body 2D so that we can actually make use of it in our player script. Now, just by adding this rigid body 2D, it's going to activate the physics system on our player. If we run this, our player is just going to fall through the ground. And the reason for that is because he has no collider. So what I'd like to do here is let's go ahead and add a circle collider or a box collider 2D perhaps, unless it's a sphere collider 2D. No, let's add a box collider 2D. And you'll see here that it added this huge box around our player. We can select edit collider here and we can go ahead and just make it fit our player. Once we've done that, you can go ahead and save your scene, run the game, and you'll see here that everything is just fine. Now we fall with gravity and we're on our platform. So what we need to do now is make it so that when we hit the D key, we go to the right. When I hit the A key, we go to the left. So the first thing we need to do is we need access to this rigid body. From there though, how do we actually move according to our inputs? So let's look at some of the logic that we can do with this rigid body. I'm going to hit this blue book here, which is going to take us to the scripting reference. And from here, we're going to go to the scripting API, and we're going to type in rigid body 2D. And we're going to look at some of the properties of the rigid body. What we're interested in is creating a physics-based character based on velocity. So if we look in here, you'll see here's velocity, linear velocity of the rigid body. And it says here the velocity is specified as a vector with components in the x and y directions. There is no z in 2D physics. The value is not usually set directly, but rather by using forces. The velocity can gradually decay due to the effect of drag if this is enabled. Basically, by using a rigid body 2D and using velocity, we're going to get a more smooth, realistic-like movement with all the forces affecting it. So let's go ahead and open up our script, and let's write out some pseudocode for what we want to do. Inside here, we have our void start and update. And what we want to do here is check for user input. So we need basically horizontal inputs, horizontal input for left and right. We can't go up and down because it's not a space shooter, right? So our player can only move left and right. Eventually we'll create a jump functionality, but all we care about right now is horizontal input. And once we get that horizontal input, we need to then access our rigid body and set our velocity using that force. So check this out. We have here our rigid body. So we need to also get a component to that. So we need to say get reference to rigid body. So create a handle to that. So get handle to rigid body. You're going to assign that handle here. Assign the handle of rigid body. And then once we have the rigid body, we can then begin typing out something like rigidbody.velocity, and it's going to be a vector 2. So you're going to say equals a new vector 2. So you're going to get current velocity equals a new velocity, and we're going to pass in the value that was returned on the x, and our y, we don't have one, so we just want to make it whatever the current y velocity is. So we would say current velocity.y basically. And that is how you're actually going to move, by setting the current velocity to a new velocity. Now this is very similar to what we did with the transform .translate and transform.position stuff, where if you want to update the position, you get the current position and assign it a new position. It's the same thing with velocity. Every frame we're taking the current velocity and we're going to assign it a new velocity based on this horizontal input. So the x is basically going to be your horizontal input. So go ahead and try your best to get this working on your own, and I'll see you guys in the challenge review.